What are some things that comes to your mind when you first hear guns in the United States? Probably gun violence and mass shootings, right? Well, you see, the topic of gun violence and gun control has always been a two-sided debate within our country, especially within politics. Now, according to Nurith Eisenman and Mark Silver, reporters for the National Public Radio, that as of 2017, it is calculated that the United States has the 28th highest rate of deaths caused by gun violence in the entire world, in which roughly 4.43 deaths per 100,000 people are averaged. Now, with those numbers in mind, people have mixed feelings whether or not guns should be banned or should be kept legal in the country. Now, as an undergrad student here at UNLV majoring in criminal justice and working law enforcement in the Army National Guard, I'm able to see both sides of the argument and how this topic has evolved over time. Now, by learning more about the topic of gun violence and its full history within this country, it will help us become more aware of the topic and why it has become such a huge debate topic within the United States today. First, I will discuss the history of gun violence and the evolution of it. Second, I will then discuss the side of the argument who favor gun control. Finally, I will then discuss the opposing side who are against gun control. Now, to start off, let's talk about the history of gun violence. So to begin, gun violence has been a well-known topic across the United States and has its own significance in our American history. Gun violence is basically the concept of committing a crime of either harming or even killing someone using a gun. It first began in the 20th century as regulations began to be placed on possessing a firearm and mass shootings already occurring at that same time frame. Now, we may think, what could be possible factors towards even wanting to commit such acts like these? Well, according to Amanda Nickerson and other authors who all specialize in bullying prevention psychology, they mention one possibility in which prenatal risk, along with childhood aggression, leading into adolescence, may even lead someone to think that gun violence is always the answer and that they would want to support it. Now, with that in mind, with more awareness being raised about the topic, especially during the 60s, laws were passed in order to control the sales of guns to citizens. Over the course of time, more laws were then getting passed, and the National Rifle Association saw that by implementing those laws, it would be in violation of the Second Amendment, as the Second Amendment gives us our right to bear arms. Now, even to this day, the conversations about gun violence and gun control is always avoided, but the debate only seems to be escalating. And according to Samantha Benthian, a writer for the History News Network, she mentions that while Americans mourn the lives lost, politicians remain divided about the best solution because they're either for gun control or against it. Now that we get an idea of the brief history behind gun violence, let's now talk about why certain politics favor gun control. Now, politics have favored for gun control laws because they believe that it can minimize the amount of gun violence that occur across the country. For this side of the argument, the politics argue that the gun itself is what commits the crime, and that by banning these weapons, it would stop them from being accessible for use and committing such violent acts. Now, with that in mind, gun control laws still came into effect during the late 1960s, especially after the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And along with that, crime rates were still rising in terms of using gun violence. Now, as a result of such events, the main law that came into effect was the Gun Control Act of 1968, a federal law that basically came into effect saying that people that were either convicted felons, drug dealers, or were showing signs of a mental illness were not allowed to have a weapon. Now, by implicating these laws and acts to regulate the sale of guns, it was thought that these crimes with a deadly weapon or mass shootings would come to an end, which is why many politics and citizens, especially in light of recent mass shootings, have come forward to favor gun control laws as they think that it'll stop everything. So now that we get a better understanding of those who are in favor of gun control, let us now look at the other side, who are against gun control. So to start off, this side of the argument believes that the gun itself is not the problem, and that it is rather the person who owns the weapon is the one that commits the violence. Now, according to Samantha Benthian again, writer for the History News Network, it is important to note that in recent mass shootings, the majority of weapons used in these situations were purchased legally, proving that the person basically commits the crime, and again, it's not the gun. Those who are against gun control can also spot another problem right off the bat, and that it violates the Second Amendment, making it unconstitutional because the Second Amendment is what gives us the right to bear arms for our own personal safety. Now, even the NRA was on this side of the argument, as having the right to possess a firearm is basically a basic American right, and it ensures more than just personal safety. Now, with the influence of the NRA, the 1986 Firearms Owner Protection Act was then passed, which would go directly against the Gun Control Act of 1968. And now, along with that being passed, along with more influence coming from the NRA, that side developed more to be more in favor of possessing a firearm and keeping gun control to a bare minimum. Now that we have a better understanding of gun violence, gun control, and how it has all evolved within this country, let's review what we reviewed. Let's review what we covered in this speech. Learning more about gun violence, whether its history and how it has evolved into its big debate topic today, we are able to be fully aware of why it is what it is now. We talked about the brief history of gun violence within this country and how it has evolved. Second, we talked about the side of the debate that is in favor for gun control. Lastly, we then talked about the opposing side who are against gun control. Now, in conclusion, gun violence has affected every single citizen of the United States, whether they were a victim or not, especially in the light of recent mass shootings that have occurred in the recent years. Now that we know more about gun violence, you now get a better understanding of how it started and how it has evolved to become what it is now in the country today.